The music is what we're going to begin with, at least. What I'm curious about is what we all make of what happens when the song begins. Where do we go? Where are we transported to, Kenneth?
Different place almost every time, I think. I mean, sometimes, if you take the very first song, it's there totally disorient and shock and provoke you. I mean, when Dennis rang me one early morning and described the very first scene of Pennies from Heaven, and he came to the point where the lighting changes and you hear the music coming up, and he told me what the song was, and he said it's going to be Elsie Carlyle singing, and I, already a ridiculous anorak of that music, said, no, I can get you that arrangement with a male voice. And he said, no, I want it to be as dislocating as possible, as disorienting, and if they switch off then and there, that's it. And so you go from things like that to places where it advances the drama, to other places, I'm just plucking at random, in episode 5, where there's many long, engrossing, wordy scenes, and one is the one in the hotel restaurant in episode 5, and at the end of it, you go into sheer, gorgeous sentimentality with a song called Hands Across the Table. And there are many other places where they have different functions. Sometimes they're dance numbers, not quite a la Astaire, because we didn't have the money and didn't want that kind of money. Other points they just illustrate, and there are other devices as well, which I'm sure Piers can remember.
Is this working? Yes. The first number is quite interesting because it's probably one of the most exquisitely appropriate in the whole series, actually, because it exactly nails the point. It exactly carries the emotion, and it tells you immediately everything about the world of the series. And this was because it was quite dangerous doing this. Not everybody was sure it was going to work, and when we were rehearsing,
nobody was sure it was going to work.
I was sure. But anyway, we did this outside rehearsal, and as one did, fortunately in those days, had several weeks of rehearsal, and we did that number, and the old ferrograph machine was turned on, and we cranked into motion, and then Bob went to the the 2 posts which signified the window, and did the number and turned back in. There were no lights, nothing. It was all dry rehearsal. And scene finished, and Dennis turned to me and he grabbed my arm like this. He said, "It's going to work. It's going to work. It's going to work."
I'm glad I did. I want to say it's not going to work.
He absolutely. I mean, it was. I just say that because Ken referred to the first number, and it is always sort of quoted, and it's a huge variety. Some of the numbers work better than others. If you were making a rigorous intellectual analysis of the whole piece, you would have to rate some of them as being sort of decorative, and some just being because they're wonderful music and they're part of the tapestry, and others are extremely apposite, and that's part of the point, really. They're not the same.
Cheryl, at what point did you think this is going to work?
Well, I don't think any of us thought for sure. We wanted it to. We thought it stood a good chance of working, but we were still in the studio. In fact, we were doing episode 6, weren't we, when 1 came out? I think.
Yeah.
And we all rushed upstairs afterwards. We finished late then. It was 10 o'clock, didn't we? Finished late, and we ran up into the box to see it live, the end of the first episode coming out and everything. And we were all very apprehensive and excited, and waiting for it to be trashed. Possibly the next day. What have we got here? A load of rubbish, or perhaps people would be as excited as we were about it. And I remember receiving the first scripts, all 6, and I turned the page, thought, oh my goodness, and just kept turning and read all 6 all the way through, and they're long, you know. And so we all hoped, I'm sure, that people would feel the way we did when we first encountered it, you know.
Kenneth Colley, your character is almost constituted by music, isn't he? Do you remember what kind of conversations you had about how this should all work, and what precisely was happening at the moment when song bursts out of this story?
No, I remember Dennis was at rehearsal in one day, and I asked him about the accordion man. I said, well, who is he? What is he? He said, I've no idea.
Perfect.
And there used to be, in those days, I lived on the Bayswater Road in Notting Hill Gate, and there was a rather young and quite good-looking young tramp would stand on a corner just staring into space, and he had a bottle of milk. And he didn't move or say anything until a pretty young woman went by, and then he became animated. And I'd seen this man a few times, and I thought, well, I've got to try and get a line on this man. And I went up to him, I said, listen, I'm an actor, and I'm playing what I called a man of the road. If I buy you a meal, will you come with me and talk about your life? And he just stared into me, my eyes, and then his eyes just went into the far distance, and he was dismissing me. And so I went home thinking, that's all I've got, I better use it. And so I just tagged things onto that. I just tagged things onto the fact that the man was here in this year, whatever it was, 1935, but he belonged somewhere else in some other way. That's the only line I had.
Christopher Gunning, by the time that you were working with Potter, his ideas about what these songs were presumably very refined.
Well, as a matter of fact, the three pieces that I worked on, because there was a film called Midnight Movie as well, all three of them used songs rather sparsely. In fact, I'm racking my brains to remember whether there are any at all in karaoke. There certainly were in Cold Lazarus.
There are some references, yeah.
Yeah, but even in Cold Lazarus, the songs referred back to Blue Remembered Hills, as did the film occasionally. And
the most
I think
spectacular
what
number, if I can just say, in karaoke, is Pennies from Heaven.
Well, yes, of course.
Yeah.
But I think, we have to remind ourselves. I've just watched, three absolutely delightful, totally superb episodes, wonderfully played, beautifully directed, terrifically written. And, why does the music work? I'm curious, because I think the use of music in Dennis's work is completely unique. Round about the same time, you see commercial directors and producers in Hollywood were coming up with songs, The Graduate, names. There's loads of them, and I can only think of one at the moment, which is pretty pathetic. But there are loads of them. But the use that Dennis made of his songs is totally different, 100% different. And, I've been asking myself as I've been watching, why is this? And I think what his songs do, and what most of the others don't, is draw us into the characters. And I think that is the absolutely crucial thing. We love the characters because we love the music, and we love their musical taste and what they're saying to each other in the songs.
But they all do different narrative things.
Yeah, they do.
But they are essentially there to say everything is all right. Even if you're facing the hangman, everything is fine.
You think they're always optimistic?
I think I mean
But there are a few
I
dark
remember
ones.
seeing, you showed it to me 35 years ago, and from the moment Arthur bursts into song, as it were, I thought this was a supreme statement of optimism, and I still think it's a supremely optimistic piece. Even as you're, I'm sitting there, the tears are rolling down my cheeks at the end. It's a wonderful end. At the same time, it's profoundly affirmative, I feel.
But surely the point is the tension. The point is the tension between the distress, pain, lust, failure, and catastrophe of the characters, and the saccharine vision of joy, religious joy.
And also I think that technically they do a lot of different things. I mean, sometimes they parody the whole idiom, other times they endorse it, and other times they bring in a kind of new meaning to the words of a song which may be very familiar, or give a more dramatic twist to a song you've never heard before. And Moonlight on the Highway, my belief has always been that it's much more of a kind of rather defiant philosophical exploration of what you can get out of that kind of resource, that kind of music, that kind of period spiritually and emotionally than actually developing the technique, because the technique of miming is there very briefly in Moonlight on the Highway and not in that scene. And Moonlight on the Highway is from 1969, when practically everybody else in Dennis's generation, including part of me, was into Godard and Jimi Hendrix and LSD and all those things. And here is Dennis saying, it's Al Bowley that will do it for you, and not psychiatry.
Yeah.
John, is there a therapeutic side to this, do you think?
I think, I mean, clearly the writing as a whole, as Ken says, it is therapy that he's expressing for himself and for us right the way through the work. And whatever dark moment or period there was in his childhood that he's dealing with all the way through the writing is a very, profound theme that runs right the way through. And I do think that the songs are a way of dealing with that, of finding a way of coping with that and finding a form of hope and belief and a certain kind of spiritual sense, clearly not a conventionally religious sense, but a certain kind of spirituality, which is profoundly comforting at a very deep level.
Piers?
I think the spirituality is terribly important, because one of the wonderful things about Pennies from Heaven is there's this very simple fable, and the moral patterning is very complex, because Arthur's such a hopeless little shit, but your heart is lifted by the surge of hope within him. The holy fool and the many Christian, very, very Christian ideas are wrapped up in the Arthur figure and the Mary Magdalene figure. So I think that is very important. But we haven't talked about Bob Hoskins, because we should talk about Bob Hoskins, because he was much loved. He was a fantastic performance, not only in this, but for many, many years. We found him late.
Which might remind us of the shortlist before we had him.
Yeah. Well, and we found Bob, and then we put Bob together with Cheryl, and we thought, right, that's it. That's it. And he was wonderfully modest. He said, look at my stubby fingers, look at my square frame, look at my stubby legs. I can't dance. Thank God I didn't have to sing. But the point about Bob was that the heart beat with great eloquence, and the point about Pennies from Heaven is it is the most amazing love story. Yeah. It's about many things, but it is a truly wonderful love story, with all the ups and downs and the rich darkness in it. And Bob, made his massive contribution to that, and he's much missed. We wish he was here. Yeah.
And he brought instantly. I mean, I'd worked with him twice before. We cast him in Pennies from Heaven, once in a cameo in a Dennis Potter, Schmiedepus, if you seek it out. And he brings instantly a kind of acting which is completely different from another world than anybody else we might have cast. I mean, because our shortlist included Alan Bates and Howell Bennett and Jonathan Price, and then suddenly, I can't remember exactly the process, there was Bob, and we could never look back. And it's in a sense, I suppose, I don't know whether you were nervous about him as an actor, because we were putting him into a situation where Dennis certainly hadn't anticipated that we would cast somebody like him, but he totally made it his universe, didn't he?
He did. I mean, I remember pushing him very, very hard. I mean, Cheryl and Ken I was sometimes very brutal and really wringing every last ounce out of him, and he resented it sometimes. But out it came. It always came out, and he was also wonderfully himself. That kind of actor who's. He's really magnificently himself.
What do you remember about acting opposite him, Kenneth Colley?
With Bob, he seemed to have no artifice, and therefore there was no barrier between him and the public. It was like one of them was doing the acting. Like a lot of actually music hall people used to be. Where I lived, there was one opposite me, and we could sneak in through the gents' toilet and get up in the gods and see him rehearse. And the best were always like that. They were not performers or acting, they were just being. And there were one of us up there. And I think Bob had that quality. He just had it in spades.
Cheryl, did you attempt to ask Potter anything about Eileen? Did you ever discuss the character with him?
No, but I do remember the read-through vividly. It is a bit odd, actually, because it's the only part I've ever played or been offered that I thought, not in an arrogant way, not in that I can be better than it, because I've had actresses say to me, I should have played that part because I'm awful. You never do that. It's real bad manners. But it's not good. But that's the only part I've ever played where I thought, if they don't give this to me, they'll have made a terrible mistake. And it wasn't because I could guarantee a result. It was because I knew there were elements in me that were tied together in such a way that could express that character, because it's so extreme, I think, you know.
That's I can bear that out because as the person who sort of more than anybody actually cast Cheryl, I found her. She read. Ken saw her. She was reading fantastically, and it was much too early. We didn't have anybody else. We didn't have key people. So we made the poor little thing wait for 4 weeks, if I'm right.
You really put me through.
She had to wait, and we just say, no, sorry, we are not quite ready. And I knew it had to be her. I couldn't imagine anybody who could conceivably, because she read it. The first time she read it, I thought, well, that's it, really.
And there's a weird
But it was too
historical
early.
footnote. These were the years in which the BBC forbade casting directors.
Absolutely.
So we had to do it all ourselves.
Yeah, no casting director. No. But they did give you a little more time. I want to talk about this journey because I think that you might have to talk, before we finish, about the ambition, the scale of the surreal, the non-realistic in Potter, and particularly in this piece. That nobody said, but the point about the music is not just the bloody music. It is an access to another level of drama, to a level of pathos, irony, clash, Brechtian alienation. It's another dramatic tool, and one of the most important things about Pennies, surely, is that it's on a theatrical scale of theatrical supra-realism. That
The
is
variety of it is astonishing.
Yes, and that which alas is now forgotten. That's to say, you won't find that.
Do you regard, when we go into the songs, do you view them as fantasy per se, or do you view them as, because I tend to look at them as, a deeper view of the human being that's inside and that's involved with the songs. That's how I look at it, in which case that's not really, you can't really call that fantasy.
No.
But lots of people do refer to the in and out of fantasy element in both this and Singing Detective, don't they?
I think we said
It isn't always that. Is it?
No, they vary. I mean, some of them are sort of cute fantasy, which
Yeah.
satirises something underneath. And sometimes the songs are almost direct expressions of the yearning that's inside the characters.
Yeah.
I mean, they really do vary.
My sense of Dennis would be, and I don't want this to be a last remark, but it may sound like it, that coming for this past month or so and seeing a lot of things, some of which I worked on, some of which I didn't, and some of which I'd forgotten, my sense of Dennis is that he was utterly unique. He's utterly, in a sense, gorgeous, and he's a total gift. Starting to me personally and in my life, to you, the audience, and to the world at large. We should utterly celebrate him.